Okay, we are reconvening our special meeting at 3:29 p.m. All right. Now I move to adjourn our special meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Special meeting is adjourned. We now move to our regular meeting, and I call to order our regular meeting at 3:30 p.m. This is a regular meeting and a public hearing of the Scottsdale Unified School District on the adoption of the proposed fiscal year 2019-2020 expenditure budget pursuant to ARS 38-431.02 and ARS 15-905 D and E. It is June 25th, and again, time is 3:30. Please stand. Board Member Beckham, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will have a roll call starting from my right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
Sandy Kravitz.
Barbara Perleberg.
Allison Beckham.
And Patty Beckman. All board members are present, and we do have a quorum. Okay, moving to agenda item 4, public hearing on the adoption of proposed fiscal year 2019-2020 expenditure budget. Mr. Gadd.
Madam President, members of the board, you can hear me okay? Mike, I think in the right place. How's that? Better?
Better? No. They're coming to help you. Woohoo.
Well, that concludes the presentation.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
All right, Madam President, members of the board, the purpose of the public hearing is to present to the governing board and the community the district's proposed 2019-20 expenditure budget. And with that, we have a PowerPoint that we would like to present, and at the end, we will entertain whatever questions either the board or the audience has. So I'll try to move through this. And if you have some questions, maybe as we proceed, especially with the technical part, I'd be happy to try to answer those when I get there. Okay, budget highlights. As you all know from the formula, there is an amount per student that the state supports for purposes of M&O expenditures. It's called a base support level. In this particular case, it's rising from 4,009 to 4,202, and that's including the 5% teacher pay increase. That's why it's as high as it is. It normally would be 2%. It's considerably more than that because the $192 increase does contain the 5% increase for teachers. There will be one more year of that increase for 2021, and then that program is set to expire. This is the 4th year of a 10-year program expiring in 2025 where the state is allocating to schools proceeds from state trust land. It's called Prop 123. And the district receives from that proposition $1 million. So it is one of those that you just need to be aware that in 2025, if there's not a replacement funding source for this plan, then the district's budget would automatically go down by $1 million. So would everybody else's proportionate to the amount that they receive. It's kind of like the sales tax. It expires, and then if you don't have a plan to replace it, then everybody's going to have less money. The current year funding is obviously applicable to our projected budget. We have an unweighted estimate next year that takes down the ADM by 503. That weights up to over 600 in the formula, but basically 503 unweighted students is what the district is currently planning its M&O budget around. If that decline is not as high as 503, then the district will be adding money back. If the decline is greater than 503, then we will be telling you the revised budget will be downward from what we have here. And then the teacher experience index, the reason that that's here, it's significant for this district. It brings in $2.5 million annually. So it indicates that we have, on average, a teaching staff that's close to probably 10 years of experience. The state average, which is compared to that number, and that's how you get the index that you see there, is roughly 9 to 9.5 years. So we basically, as a district, are slightly above the statewide average. That's why we have money to fund that higher salary level, and that's why you have $2.5 million. You need to be aware that obviously retirements erode that number, and that's something just to be aware that as you bring in new teachers and older teachers leave, the tendency will be for that number to go down. Okay, onward. The next slide,
Wait till
the district additional assistance, it's the capital budget. Basically, the state is restoring that reduction over the next few years. There's another year or two to go beyond this one. It restored approximately $3.2 million of regular annual capital money to the district with its scheduled restoration over 5 years. We are in the 5th year of a 15% override election. Don't need to tell you that. You voted at the last meeting to renew that election in November. And then the 3rd year of the capital outlay override. It is a 7-year override, so it expires in 2022. And if you want to keep it, then it will require a vote just as the M&O does in order to do that. It's about an $8 million adjustment upward to the district's capital budget. That is something that some districts have, some districts do not. Some districts use bond in replacement of a capital outlay override, some use both. It probably has a lesser importance because of the restoration of the state in its capital budget. So that $3.2 million up there obviously contributes some additional funds beyond needing to have an $8 million capital outlay override. Next slide, a little bit of a review of the formula. The weighted student count is 28,393. Using the base support level, it's 2% plus the 20 by 20 year 2. Results in 119 million. Teacher experience index, an additional 2%. Raises it to 121. We can take audit expenses outside the budget. Our annual audit is $60,000. That creates a base support level of 121. Transportation in the formula adds 8.1. And so we have a total revenue control limit of $130 million. That is without the M&O override. So it's the basic formula that all districts follow. The only difference is for us, we have the M&O override will subsequently add to that, and that may not be the case with other districts, although about 2/3 of the districts in the state currently have an M&O override. So the next slide, we take that revenue control limit, we add the override, we can add estimated tuition. This is special education, $125,000. That's students that are coming to us that are being paid for by other districts. We have a desegregation budget of 7.3. That is frozen, has been for quite some years. There's 19 districts in the state that have some allocation here. So it is a budget that continues every year, but only at 7.3. It's mainly staff. So as staff increases, salary increases especially come about, you're going to have to pull M&O money into DSEG in order to fund those because that 7.3 is fixed, or you reallocate money inside of it. It's just what it is. Budget balance carry forward is an estimate. We won't know that number until the fall after the encumbrance period ends in August. We're still estimating 6%, 9.6 million. We have some small dropout prevention money, some registered warrants, which is basically what interest we pay with the treasurer when we don't have cash in the fund. Energy savings, we have to transfer from our M&O budget limit into a special account called energy savings to pay for any agreements that we have for either water or energy savings. So that's where that money would come in to pay for solar or any other energy conservation measures that the district has taken where it is not paying for the improvement as a lump sum one time. It's dealing with it over a multiple year period through a lease purchase. So that's since your savings in the M&O budget will be in the utility line, the assumption here is you can give up that savings then in order to make those payments. That's what the rationale is for that transfer. The Prop 123, talked about that earlier, of $1 million. We have a general budget limit then for next year of $164 million. Compared to our $160 million currently, we have a growth of $4 million. Most of that is 2020 money. Most of that comes from teacher salary increases, and that wouldn't be there if it wasn't the 2020 program with our declining enrollment. Okay, the budget amount. This basically refers to all funds. I don't know how readable that is, and maybe if we dim the lights a little bit, it might be helpful. I don't know if we can do that easily or not, but it may be helpful. It's got all of the different funds that the district has, and it's, as you go around, obviously M&O is a fairly large portion at 41%. Indian Gaming is at the bottom with 1%, and as you move around that wheel, federal grants, thank you, that's great. Federal grants are 1.4 million or 4%, debt is 7%. Prop 301, Classroom Site Fund is 4%, capital outlay is 4%, bond is 23%, and that's including our upcoming sale. Adjacent ways is 1%. State grants are pretty negligible, so 1.7 million. And then other funds, which are basically the cash control funds that we have talked about previously, are in that last sliver or that last pie at 15%. So that is how the current budget is divided. And it gives you some perspective on what is large and what is not so large. And obviously M&O is large. The other funds that you see up here contribute their individual and more specific purpose, but they are not significantly large when it comes to comparing those funds with M&O, for an example. So it does show you that federal grants are relatively small at 2.7 million, and state grants are even smaller at 1.7. And you do have some capital money that is sizable. If you take capital and you take the bond and you put those together with adjacent ways, you have some capital money that well exceeds $100 million. So that is a significant piece of this pie. So it's M&O, capital, and after that, the fund distinctions become much smaller. The next slide is to take the M&O budget and divide it up according to the state's definition of functions. And I'll start on the right-hand side with instruction. It's at 55%, which is in the higher end of the range that you find with districts. Student support is 10. Instructional staff is 4. General admin, which would be district level, is 2. School admin is 6. Central services, which would be services that like IT, things like that. Plant operations at 16, most of which would be utilities. And transportation at 5, and then non-instructional being fairly small. So when you sit back and look at this particular pie, it's what you would want to see. it shows instruction as being the major component, as you would expect it to be. If it weren't, then there's issues. There are districts that are well into the low 40% range here. That is not a place that you want to be. You want to be at 55, hopefully moving towards 60, so that you're at that upper end of the scale in terms of what the state, the community, and others expect you to devote your operating budget to, which is instruction. The other areas are, obviously not as large, and those are the ones that get some attention when the district has budget shortfalls, especially the student support area and especially plant services. Places where there is peripheral staff to the classroom tends to be places that you would go if you had M&O budget problems like failed overrides or whatever the story might be. Okay, the capital budget. Furniture and equipment, 34%, fairly large. Instructional aids, software, a lot of software would be the next at 9%. Textbooks, $1.5 million at 8%. Library books at 2%. Construction services, it's basically maintenance plans is what it is. It's parking lots and painting and those sorts of things is 6%. Technology is 39%, and vehicles are 2%. So as you would generally expect, technology is fairly high, and so is furniture and equipment. You would probably like to see textbooks being a little bit higher than that, but that depends upon the district and what its preference is between technology and between textbooks and how that priority sorts out. This is an overview of the district's capital budget. It includes the capital outlay override and the annual capital budget together. And as I say, it's basically furniture and technology is where it concentrates itself at. Okay, tax rate. You have 5 years worth of tax rate history here on this slide. The primary rate, the one on the far left-hand side, is the operating budget. And as you can see, it is down. It's an estimated amount for FY20 at $2.47 a hundred. It's coming off of $2.56. The reason it's down is the assessed valuation is rising about 5%, which is close to the maximum it's allowed to rise without new construction. So that's good news for taxpayers in that the rate is falling. The secondary rate is the other part of the tax rate. It's up about 3 cents, as you can see from the estimate here. It consists of those things to the right of that second section, like M&O override, capital override, Class B bonds, and DSIG. All of those are functions of that secondary tax. So if you think of all those 4 different categories, those are all pushed together in terms of a total secondary rate because they are basically voter authorized with the exception of desegregation. So the total tax rate is the one that most people relate to because that formulates their tax bill. And as you can see, it's projected to go down about 7 cents from what it currently is on a total basis. It's got, we have one of the lowest rates, at least on a unified basis. I think we have the lowest rate in Maricopa County, if not very close to it. So you can see here that the majority of the tax bill is not necessarily connected up with overrides or elections as much as it is just the basic obligation of taxpayers through the qualifying tax rate to pay for the district's M&O budget. The obligations, the burdens here from taxation, voter taxation, are not very major. If your assessed valuation were considerably smaller, they would turn out proportionally to be much higher. But because you have the advantage of having high assessed valuation, the impact on the tax rate, very minimal. Okay, and this takes you into the tax rate a little bit further. It compares this year with next. Next year is an estimate. The primary rate is going down by almost 10 cents. You see the M&O override of the total rate of $3.63. It occupies 34 cents. so it occupies less than 10% of the total rate. Capital outlay occupies 15 cents. Debt service, bond, retirement, and interest occupies 53%. Desegregation, 13. And so the total secondary rate is $1.16. The primary is $2.47. The total is $3.63. So again, keeping things in perspective, the big tax rate, of course, is M&O because everybody has the qualifying tax rate, and that's where the majority of the money is at. The second largest one here is the override, but again, 34 cents on a rate that's that low is not a lot of money. So even, and I guess debt service, because of bonding, of course, is got some rate connected with it. But generally speaking, the secondary rate is half of the primary rate, $1.16 versus $2.47. So you can see that proportionately, the primary rate, which you're obligated to from the formula, is twice what the tax burden is for anything else that we might have done in terms of raising funds. That's important because we obviously are very good stewards of the taxpayer money by having a low implication of election in terms of tax rate. Okay, and with that, Madam President, members of the board, I'd like to call Shannon Crozier up, Shannon, if you could. And there are a few questions that we received after the board approved the proposed budget, and we did the advertisement. So Shannon is going to talk a little bit about those that you see up here on the screen, and then there'll be a couple more on the second screen, and then anybody who has further questions will try to answer. So Shannon, proceed.
So we had a couple questions that had come in after the proposed. The first one actually wasn't a question that came in, but we wanted to point that out. The board had approved moving $2 million into cash accounts. So we did that through salary and benefits that were moved out of M&O. Those primarily came from the finance department, human resources, and plant services. So you will see somewhat of a decrease when looking at M&O, and that's why, because we moved those positions out and over to cash accounts. There was a question that had to do with people transportation and a difference in what was on the revised budget and an increase for this for the proposed budget. And that really comes down to, we have the same FTE, so nothing really changed there. But when we did the revised budget, we had pulled some vacant positions. We have a lot of vacant positions within transportation. So it reduced some of the transportation budget for positions to help offset with some of the cuts that we had to make with declining enrollment. So the FTE is the same, but the revised to what you're seeing now, we are now budgeting for those positions like every position was filled from the first day through the full school year. So that's why you see that increase within the transportation. With the federal and state funds, again, that also showed a decrease between the revised and the proposed. And that really comes down to, we don't know all the details yet for what we're going to get for state and federal funds. There are some grants that carry over, and we pay them into September, and so there's an issue with how much is going to be the carryover for that. And then we don't know the full amount that we'll receive for all of our grants and what's going to be allocated. We don't get those numbers generally till a little bit later. And that falls also with the state funds. We don't know what we're going to receive for results-based funding at this time. We'll find that out in the fall. So that'll increase the state budget when we have that information. And then there's the college career exam that we also don't know we know we'll probably receive funds for that, but we don't know that amount yet. Whereas when we do a revision, we have all those pieces. We know exactly what we're going to have for carryover. We know exactly what we're going to be allocated. So we try to limit, and we don't want to over budget those accounts, so we've reduced them back a little bit, and that's why you see the decline between those two. And then the other question came within food services. We had reduced that by $1.5 million. When we really tried to look at where are we really spending our money, and are we aligning our budget with where we're really spending the money. When we were looking at food services, we had been budgeting $11.5 million, and we're not spending that. We're not seeing that kind of revenue come in through food services, so it didn't seem appropriate to continue to budget that at $11 million. So that's why the expenditures, the revenue we're seeing is more in the $9 million range, a little over $9 million, and so that's why we felt it was appropriate to reduce that budget down to $10 million. There were a couple other questions that came in about capital this afternoon as well. Those came in today, this week, so I don't have those in here. Like I said, we've been trying to budget those things and the places that we think we're really going to spend them within capital, M&O, and in all of our funds. And so with that, we had been budgeting far more in Function 1000 than what we really needed. And the expenditures were coming through for like software. We're hitting in our curriculum department, which is a 2200 series, as well as IT, which is a 2500 series. And so we moved some of that budget away from 1000 and into those other functions because that's where the software is really being paid from. There was also a $400,000 for plant services, which I understand is for some white fleet. I'm not sure if that's trailers or trucks, but it has to do with the white fleet that would be in plant services, as well as we've been doing some things like radios and AED defibrillators and some additional equipment for those groups. So that's why those budgets reflected a little bit higher than what they have in the past. I think that was the questions I had gotten so far. I don't know if there's any other
Board Member
questions.
Beckham?
Thank you, Shannon. Could you go back to the last slide? I'll start there.
Okay.
I just want to get clarification on the first one.
Jeff, can you go back? Thanks.
So I understand, you're moving out of, you reduced the FTE in finance. I noticed you reduced that about almost 20 people.
Yes,
right?
we reduced that quite a
And
bit.
so I'm sure human resource plant services. When you say you move it to cash accounts, which cash accounts and what do you plan on using the money for?
So quite a few were moved to indirect costs. That was the area that had the highest amount that we were going to be taking salaries from. So a bulk of them the majority of them went to indirect costs. Some of the plant services were moved to a civic center account, Fund 515. I believe we said we were going to do about 100,000 out of that account. And then we had some funds as well in community schools. And so some of that went into those ones. So on the prior presentations that we've done to the board that were showing the different amounts we were going to take from the cash accounts, that was the $2 million, and that's what we primarily hit those areas. And those are the areas that are a little bit more appropriate to probably hit, like indirect costs, community ed, and plant services.
So when you take the $2 million from M&O, does it show up as a revenue to
No.
those cash accounts?
No, it would be just a reduction in budget to those cash accounts, or reduction in expenditures.
Okay. So the actual principal amount of those cash accounts does not change?
The cash accounts will go down. So you'll see.
But it goes up because you put in the 2 million into, for
No.
instance,
No.
indirect.
No, it goes down because we're moving expenditures that had not previously been in those cash accounts. We're moving those expenditures to the cash accounts, so you'll see the cash should start to go down in those funds. Because we're now, things that were not, $2 million worth of things that weren't paid before out of those cash accounts will now be paid out of those cash accounts.
But each one of those cash accounts also has revenue generation out of each one.
But there's no estimated change in revenue
No,
to
Correct.
compensate for that $2 million
Correct. I'm
added
just looking at,
expenditure.
historically, though, they are revenue-generating accounts, and they have generated a surplus in the past, which is how we've gotten a larger cash balance in those 5 accounts that you showed us that are unrestricted, which Civic Center and indirect costs are unrestricted.
they have, and we
correct?
also have we have expenses that we were paying anyways out of those accounts that used up some of the revenue. We've kept we've continued with what we anticipate will come out of those budgets or those accounts for next year. This is in addition to what we've previously paid out of those.
Okay. All right.
So we should start to see those start to go down.
And so then in the increase in pupil transportation, can you kind of in simple terms explain how it's the past board has always had an interest in reducing the transportation expenditure? Am I correct in that? It's always been brought up every year I've been on the board. And this year it went up. So, and enrollment's down.
So
we-
we have
can
the
you
same
explain
number
how
of
that's happening?
FTE within that. We gave all employees the 5%, so that adds partly to it. And then, like I said, when we're budgeting, we end up, and I think why we've seen those reductions in expenses in prior years as well, is that we just don't fill all those positions. But when we're budgeting at the beginning of the year, we have to be under the assumption that we are going to fill them, and we're going to fill them for the entire year. So that's why the budget right now is higher. The other part of that is, until we get into the fall, there could be vacant positions that we think might be this amount, but we hire somebody who is less, and we're trying to make sure that we cover the full amount that we could possibly be paying. So we don't even know until this fall exactly what's going to be open, and then exactly how much we're going to be paying individuals that we've hired over the summer. So we're estimating that we're putting it at a high amount, so we know we're covered for whatever we hire and who we hire.
Okay, so that's it, there's a cushion in there.
Yeah.
Okay. And then on the next page.
Okay. I think that had to do the food services.
Right, food services. When you talk about the 10 million, that's the expenditures, or you?
Expenditures, plus there's a
Because the
little over $1
budget's-
million that we transfer out of food services over to indirect costs.
Because that's the surplus that's left over. But the, but
Well, it's
the
not even
10
that it's a
the
surplus,
10
there's a certain percentage that we're allowed, that the state says we're allowed to transfer of their revenue, so it's that percent.
But it's a surplus.
Yeah, I mean, we
Expenditures
know that they're not
we
in the
don't
hole, that
use.
they have plenty of money, so we go
Correct.
ahead and take that full transfer.
So, but the 10 million is what's anticipated to be the expenditure, not the revenue.
The expenditure with the transfer in
I
it.
just want to make sure. So
Yeah.
well, I guess I'm going to be getting to a point of is there any additional funds in this budget that we could be using? Is food services one of them? Is there enough cushion in?
Food services, I believe, is completely restricted, I mean, has restrictions to what we can do with it, so it's not something that we could move other, salaries to.
There's a percentage that's called an unrestricted indirect cost rate that the state sets. It's about 25% thereabouts of their expenditures is transferable to indirect costs if they have that surplus. So we are close to exhausting that 25% because that program has been so successful. In answer to your question, if you wanted to go further with food service, you would have to find positions within the M&O budget that have a direct relationship to food service. Let's take a warehouse driver. Let's take somebody in IT, people who don't normally get connected up to that department but provide support to that department. You would then transfer that position to being paid directly by food service because they're shut off now from any indirect cost contribution above that level. So, I mean, there are ways that are not preferable, but there are ways, if they had more surplus than you really would like to have, and you've exhausted the indirect cost transfer, then you would start to look for how much of the utility bill could they pay based upon the size of the dining room and I mean, you can get off into a cost accounting exercise if you want to find other ways in which to charge food service funds that normally would have been paid from M&O.
So is it, and I'm truly asking because I don't know. So when you're designing the budget and you look at a $10 million expenditure in your budget, and if you don't spend that entire 10 million, then within your budget, those funds would be available to be used for something else.
Yes, but they stay inside the food service fund, but that is correct. They would be
Okay,
available.
so at the time of budgeting, if you budgeted it less, let's say you made it 9 million, would you have, and I'm not just picking out food services, it could be any category in your budget. It's just that you happen to have it up here. And if you put that at 9 million, would you have then $1 million that you could use somewhere else in your budget?
A budget is the estimated amount that you're going to spend, okay?
But if you-
It is not a limitation on how much you can spend as long as you have a $10 million capability. If food service participation would go up and there would be more need for food service staff, then you would likely go over the 9 million, but that's fine because you have a revenue stream that's 10 million. So, you have that. You have to remember that the budget is not a fixed amount that I can definitely tag on to exactly what's going to be spent during the year because things change. As long as I have the revenue, because it's a revenue cash controlled fund, as long as I have the revenue, I can add
do
more expenditures to it as the year goes on.
And into other accounts?
Well,
Okay, thank you.
When I was looking at the food service accounts, the revenue that's coming in is not, it's not like we're getting $11-12 million in revenue and only, the revenue that we're getting in is essentially close to what we're budgeting within the expenditures.
But if you look at your expenditures, they're less than that, and that's what I was looking
Yeah.
at.
One thing that's important to realize here is indirect costs is a fairly large cash control fund. It is fed almost entirely by food service. You saw on that slide the amount of federal monies that we get. That's small. There's an indirect cost rate of like 4%. That's not going to give you a lot of money. That 25% that I talked about earlier from food service, that's where the lion's share of the revenue comes from. So if the food service program, for whatever reason, would have difficulty, so does indirect cost have difficulty, and so do all the people we transferred to indirect cost have difficulty. So we have to remember that some of these funds are heavily reliant upon a single program or a department in which to gain that revenue stream from. Federal programs here in a non-inner-city district will be relatively low. If you went to an inner-city district, it would be the reverse. Federal programs would be very high, and food service probably relatively low, so it just depends.
But is it not true that indirect costs have been rising, that the balance has been rising over the past 3 years?
I think it's probably
The
been...
balance has been
It's been
rising.
rising, so
The
those
amount that
funds
we're
could be
receiving
used.
is going down. The amount that we're able to take from grants is going down.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Board Member Perleberg?
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm going to build on a lot of that comment and I'll just go ahead and start on this slide because what I'm hearing, I hear Board Member Beckham's questions and the answers here and how I'm perceiving it is that we did, in fact, with this action here, lower the budget for food service from 11.5 million to 10 million, which then, as I understand it, opened up 1.5 million back into our M&O.
No.
No.
No. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Can you help me understand what exactly happened there?
So the food services is a 510 fund. It's separate from the M&O.
Okay.
And so by reducing that budget, all it changes is that our budget is now 10 million versus 11 million. It doesn't give us any more in indirect cost. It doesn't give us any more into M&O. It's just a reduction of that particular fund.
It's a more accurate
But, yeah.
reflection
Okay.
of annually what that fund does, dollar-wise.
Okay, so it is just literally hypothetical dollars
It's a paper-
versus real M&O dollars.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Thank you very much.
But it's
Okay.
hypothetical based on history.
Yes.
I understand, yes. Okay, so going back to the slides then, I want
Okay.
to clear up any other misperceptions I have.
Going back one?
Yeah, go back
Am I
one,
able to go back one?
because I want to
Okay.
make sure I understand this too. So the pupil transportation budget, you have positions that I don't know for how long have not been filled or how many of these positions have not been filled, but they were, correct me if I'm wrong, budgeted in the M&O budget. At one point, they were taken out of that M&O budget, or sorry, taken out of the pupil transportation budget forever. How many employees? I don't know what
So
amount
we-
we're looking at here, but
We reduced, with the revised budget, we realized we had vacancy savings sitting within, because those positions weren't filled. We'd budgeted for them, but they weren't filled, so
Right.
they're sitting vacant. We took some of the money within that 400 program and moved that back up to regular ed on the revised budget. When we're doing this budget, we're saying we need to budget that for the entire amount as if every position was filled at the full.
Okay. And I guess that is one of my questions, is kind of the logic behind kind of reversing that. Is there an absolute need
We-
to fill those positions? Is it the
There
goal
is.
and intention to fill those positions because we need them? We've just somehow survived without them.
Yeah, in fact,
The last few years, is that-
we've had to move some budget around to be able to cover, because we can't fill those transportation spots. We've had to bring in some contracted busing. I know we have we have people who have CDL license, but they're driving when that's not normally they're the mechanic, but they're out
Okay.
driving. So yes, we definitely have the need for those. I mean, we've had to, with athletics, give them additional budget to pay for charter buses because we didn't have the drivers to be able to get them to those events. So the need is definitely there. It's just there's a lot of open positions within transportation.
All right. Thank you for that clarity. And then my last one, the very top one, You've moved, so the cost of these staff members into these other accounts. Is it the idea that in those cash counts you have a buildup and they're non-recurring dollars and you're just going to keep taking a chunk of 2 million out? Or are there recurring dollars that are actually covering these?
There's probably both.
There's both.
There's probably both. There's
Okay.
probably a balance that doesn't necessarily repeat itself as it diminishes.
Mm-hmm.
There's also some new funds that are coming in. So you have to kind of look at history and
Mm-hmm.
then project ahead, because you want to make sure that you're not overtaxing that fund with how much transfer you're making of positions
Right.
from M&O into one of those cash control funds, and then you've got
Right.
trouble in the cash control fund. So it's a mixture of the two. And it simply is probably using mostly surplus money, but then once that surplus money is assigned to that position, that surplus doesn't necessarily, in the scheme of things, always get replaced. It just starts
Sure.
dropping.
Understood.
And what you have to be careful of is it doesn't drop so far that that fund can't support itself. So you have to stop at some point and say, that's enough.
Right.
We've done enough transferring, we need to stop using that cash control fund in which to offset an M&O problem.
So then obviously the result of that would be a return to those positions in an M&O and thus an increase in those
If, for example,
costs.
Civic Center's a lot of rentals.
Right.
If the rental business that we're in
Mm-hmm.
went in half, we would have trouble supporting the number of plant positions we have now put into Civic Center. And you're right, if
Okay.
that dramatic change in revenue would occur in that cash control fund, we would have to take those positions, some of them, and move them back to M&O. And we would be telling the board in building the next year's budget, we have some fixed cost increases, one of which is to move back into M&O positions that have been transferred that no longer can be supported in that cash control fund.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I have a question. Can you speak to the budget balance carry forward for a minute? A while back, not under your...
In the M&O?
Yes, the 6%.
Whoops.
Oops, went the wrong way. The,
Where do you have that? Because in years past, I know that they would take that budget balance carry forward, or I had seen it before, allocated initially before you have the 100-year numbers, et cetera, and put in the classroom or somewhere else. Can you speak to it for a moment?
yeah. The budget balance carry forward is a part of your total of permissible M&O budget. Okay? It adds spending authority, just as the formula does. It's generally assigned, it's assigned throughout the budget. It doesn't necessarily have a particular purpose, but it's primarily assigned to the instructional category because that is the area that's the largest inside the M&O budget, and it's the one that could have, because of staffing and students, the one that has the most volatility in terms of what the expenditures might be. Let's say that we had a big influenza, and the substitute budget, which is 4 million, becomes 8 million. Okay? That's why you put more of the cash balance in there, because it buffers that kind of a problem. So, it really doesn't have any specific assignment. Does it have a preference as to where it goes? Yeah, probably instruction. And then if that 6 million becomes 4 million, then in the next year, we've got an issue of $2 million that we don't have to assign to the formula, to the total, and we'll be telling the board, you're going to have to set aside in your new budget calculation $2 million to create enough revenue to bring that budget balance carry forward back up again. And as I think I said to the board earlier, the reason we have it is attrition. The reason that number is as high as it is we can't fill these positions. As soon as this economy goes south, and it will, when it goes south, then we have a line of people who want every position we've got. That budget balance carry forward is going to plummet, because all of those positions that Shannon just talked about are going to be filled. Okay, so that's when you have to start looking at what impact that has, and so every one of these has a cause and effect, and you just have to understand that some things are really important to watch, and and that's how you keep yourself out of trouble, and you don't overextend yourself, because this budget now is pretty economy dependent, with the budget balance carry forward, with the Ducey money for salary increases, with Prop 301. this whole budget, especially teacher compensation, is very economy dependent. Teachers, I'm not sure, understand that. But if that economy goes south and that 0.6% the sales tax goes south with it, and it will, then what do we do when we're paying teachers $5,000 of 301 money? We can't sustain that any longer. Okay? That's what I mean about economy sensitive. Not only did the budget balance carry forward plummet, because we have all these positions that are filled, we now have this lack of sales tax revenue that the state says, guess what? Instead of $425 a student, it's now $250 a student. Well, how do we make up that difference? That's going to be a board decision about, are you going to try to carve out of the M&O budget enough money to make up that gap that just got created because the economy caused it, or are you going to reduce? And that's why a lot of people treat the 301 money as an addendum money, so they can take it down, and you probably will have to take it down. And teachers will be all, amazed by all of that, but they have been told repeatedly, you have this addendum, you have this 301 adjustment to your salary, and it's all dependent upon one single source of revenue, 0.6% sales tax. So it didn't used to be that way years ago. Everything was formula-based, everything was wonderful. But now you have Prop 301, you have Prop 101, which is the one we talked about with the state trust land. Lots of this stuff is now dependent upon other revenue sources. Long ways around. I'm sorry I took so long.
That's okay. One last quick question, because you have been doing this for so long, you're just the person to ask. So regarding our tax rate, a couple of years ago, you looked at cash on hand when you set the tax rate, and then I think 2 years ago it changed to where you didn't consider cash on hand when the tax rate was set.
Yeah.
Where are we now with that? And I don't believe it's considered when you set the tax rate currently, correct?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not, and I think it's unfortunate that it's not, because I think the taxpayers would be benefited from a cash position that if you had an excess amount of money, that's where it should go.
Right.
Unfortunately, the legislation changed, and so that cash being used as an offset to the tax rate is no longer permissible. So we will be building cash in the treasurer's office, not spendable. It's just there because we don't have the authority budgetarily to spend it on anything. And that will continue until someone says, hey, what is all this cash in here in funds that are not spendable? What are we here for? Just to count money every day? And maybe we'll change the legislation back where districts can decide to use that cash to which offset their tax rate. That's what I hope will happen.
Right. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Too bad.
Any further questions?
Oh, a couple of other quick slides, if I might.
Sure.
As soon as I can get back to where I was. It's no easy task. Who am I looking for? Oh, Shannon probably knows how to do it. Yeah. Thank you, Shannon. Okay, budget provisions. I just wanted to make sure that the takeaway from this public hearing has got some things that you'll try to remember. We're not doing any budget reductions that affect instructional programs. We're not changing class ratios, staffing standards, any of that sort of thing. Number two, class size, as I say, stays the same. Those ratios occupy 65% of our budget, M&O. Those ratios are important numbers, class sizes by grade level. But we're not changing any of those in this proposed budget for next year. We provided a 5% increase for all employees. We've enhanced their benefits by reducing or eliminating their deductible, by adding life insurance, by not increasing any deductions for increased cost of medical insurance. They got a really good deal. Not only an increase in salary, but a good deal in that the benefits are not eating up any of that increase. We're using cash accounts to balance M&O. We just talked about that. And we've got a tax rate that's declining from what it was this year. So I think all of those are pluses, and that's great. I think it's a wonderful track record. The calendar that we have that you will be dealing with when you come back from recess on August 6th is our first board meeting. We will ask you to look at some draft pro statements that will be in the pamphlet. The board gets to submit one, as long as it's not longer than 200 words. We'll present to you the one that you submitted last time. We need you to approve on August 6th so that the printing process can proceed. We need you to approve the pro statement. We'll also, on the 20th, the next meeting, we'll ask you to look at the election pamphlet, which is required by the 27th. If there's anything in there you want us to change, like the purpose of how we're going to spend the money, whatever, that will be in front of you. The last day to mail information pamphlets to voters will be October 1. The last date for voter registration is October 7th. And Election Day will be November 5th. So it's obvious from this schedule that the month of October is really the month in which people will be voting, and it will be an all-mail-in election. And so the count will come quickly. The Elections Department will have all of your emails, and they will email you by 8 o'clock with polls closing at 7 what the election results are. So that's an overview of what to expect in the next few months, and that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gadd. Okay, do I have any requests for public comment on the adoption of the proposed 2019-2020 expenditure budget? No? Okay, no requests for public comment. Any further questions from board members? Okay, moving to action item 5A, I motion to approve action 5A, the adoption of the proposed fiscal year 2019-2020 expenditure budget. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay, I now make a motion to adjourn our public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The public hearing is adjourned at 4:24 p.m. All right, we are now calling to order our regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District. It's June 25th, and the time is 4:24 p.m. We again are going to stand for the pledge. Board Member Beckham, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will have another roll call, starting from my right.
Jan Michael Greenberg.
I'm still here, Sandy Kravitz.
Barbara Perleberg.
Allison Beckham.
And Patty Beckman. All board members are present, and we do have a quorum. Moving on to approving the agenda, I would like to pull and table item 14K, approval of the annual renewal of the Intergovernmental Agreement, IGA, between SUSD and the East Valley Institute of Technology, EVIT, provision of Joint Technical Education District courses, JTED. And item 14F, consent item, personnel action items, Robert Scavetta, listed under separations, needs to be removed. Do I have any other changes to the agenda from board members? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Board Member Kravitz moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. We now
So
call on
then-
Dr. Picard
Oh, thank you.
for his superintendent's comments.
Thank you, President Beckman, members of the board. I really have no prepared announcements or comments today, other than the fact that this is our last board meeting for the 2018-2019 school year. And I would like to be sure to wish all of our employees and all of you a very happy, although short, summer vacation, and we will be back on August 6th. Thank you.
Okay. Then we move on to our information and discussion items. 12A, the first read of revisions to policy BEDH, public participation in board meetings. Ms. Marshall.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Picard and Sandra. For your consideration this afternoon is policy BEDH, public participation at board meetings. As I explained in your background, documents, we are recommending 2 changes. We noticed that our policy had one change from the ASBA model policy, and that is we had that personal attacks, et cetera, are, quote, not acceptable here, where ASBA recommended the word discouraged. So we're recommending that change. In addition, Board Member Greenberg had a conversation with ASBA about this policy as well. I contacted Chris Thomas at ASBA and asked him, we do not yet have an ASBA advisory on the policy, but I asked him what the intentions were of ASBA, and he shared that they intend to recommend deletion of this next sentence here that I'm highlighting, which reminds presenters of public comment that certain comments may subject them to a civil action for defamation. In general, the reason for both of those changes is to avoid chilling the right to free speech. Discouraged versus not acceptable. When we looked at the history of this policy, you can see it was last revised in 2002, which is before anyone in my office was working for the district, and we could not find anything in the history except that it was the entire governing board policy manual approved at once. Imagine that. And the note just said that it was in compliance with what ASBA recommended, but somehow this got changed at some point along the way, that part. And then the second sentence is currently part of ASBA's model, but they are intending to make a different recommendation. Are there any questions on this one? Oh, I just wanted to also comment that later in your meeting, you'll have BEDB, the agenda, which we're talking about whether to move or make changes to public comment, and so it made sense to get you started on this policy as well. With that, I'll take any questions or comments or discussion.
Any questions? Board Member Greenberg?
I'd just like to thank the administration for reaching out to ASBA. This was, as Michelle Marshall pointed out, I attended an ASBA training session in January, I believe, January or early February, that went over a bunch of these, especially board communications with the public, and this was something that Chris had brought up as probably something prohibiting speech based on its content being unconstitutional, so being aware of that. So I just thank the administration for looking into it and presenting this to us.
Any further questions, comments? No, thank you, Ms. Marshall.
Okay, I will plan to bring this back for a second read and approval on consent, since it sounds like there aren't any requests for changes or discussion. Thank you.
All right.
That will be in August, our next meeting.
Moving on to discussion item 12B, a summary of our legislative report. Mr. Gadd.
Madam President, members of the board, I'll try to be as brief as I can with this. I selected from the list of legislation that passed this last session these selected bills that I thought were worthy of mention because they do have some impact generally for our district. The first one is the hourly change on 7th and 8th graders from 1,000 hours annually of instruction to 890. That coincides with the 4th through 6th grade. Now, that's a minimum number. So, boards do not need to change anything if they don't want to change anything. It is requested especially by rural districts who wanted those times to be the same. So, again, that's just that's where that's coming from, especially for transportation and some other things. The second one is the evaluation components of the teacher evaluation, principal evaluation, has a change that is a little hard to figure out where that goes, but it's currently states that 20 to 33% of the evaluation must be data-driven. It now is fixed itself at 33%, so it's fixed it at the high end of the scale. So it would lean toward test scores, things of that sort, If you're talking about data, that's where that one goes. So it's more of an interest in wanting to make that evaluation more contingent upon something more measurable than maybe in the past. Senate Bill 1161 is a fairly major one. That one does a lot to what's happening with facilities. It's requiring the School Facilities Board to develop a list of surplus district space, vacant and partially used. That list is submitted to SFB, and they put it on a almost like a multiple listing service, I suppose. Anyone who wants space consults their list and see if space is available in places that they want to pursue that. The district does not have to do anything with actually marketing the space or selling the space or leasing the space. At this point, it is strictly one where there's a requirement that you tell us that you have it. And the definition is that 2 years is the required for vacant 4,500 square feet of contiguous space for partially exempt or partially vacant. It does exempt SPED, CTE, preschool, magnets, etc., but that's limited to only 25% of the district's square footage. If the building has been vacant or partially used for the last 3 years, the district may dispose of that building without a vote of the electorate. That is a big change. Over the years, always whenever you sell real property, you had to seek voter approval. This one does change it directly to, if it's vacant for 3, the district governing board has sole authority and determination as to what they want to do to dispose of that building, if that's what they want to do. Leases have been extended from 15 years to 20 years in duration. You have some leases later on in your agenda to approve this evening. Those are 15-year leases, probably plenty long enough. But just so that you know that that provision is there. If it's longer than a 20-year, then you have to seek voter approval in order to offer that lease longer than 20 years. So what this basically does is it takes space that the district has, puts charters and private schools on the same footing as any other purchaser or leaseor might be on. You can't discriminate. Requires you to list the space if it truly, your definition is vacant, and I say your definition. And then you move on from there. You do have now the ability to create a plan that if you have vacant space and you want to ultimately submit that to the voters for approval for revenue, that would go to the school plan fund. That would tend to be limited to capital. Then that's something the board can decide to do, and it does not require a vote to do that. So it is a fairly large change. It definitely moves surplus space to the forefront with others who might want a desire to use that space. It would create competition for the district, theoretically, from others, especially charters. It allows you to dispose of real property where that was not doable before without an election. It does extend lease. So, I mean, it's got those provisions connected to it. And so for some districts who are very much a candidate for charter schools because of what they believe marketing would benefit them, they're going to be interested in what surplus space you have to offer and go from there. So you can approach it from a strategic standpoint in different ways, but it is a change from what it was in the past. Obviously, there have been situations where surplus space has been limited to non-competes, meaning special education agencies are frequent. You will see some of those later on in the agenda this evening for leases. They all are SPED. So therefore, there's not a direct compete with regular ed ADM. Those are selected because they are not a compete. But this would open that up to not just special education agencies. It would open up to anybody who has a K-12 program, and and a lot of districts have limitations. They have non-compete clauses in those leases that say basically I can't lease it to you and you can establish a K-8 school and you never told me to start with, there's a clause that prevents that from happening. And then you just take the space back. So clearly, there has been and continues to be, even in the case of some of our leases, you know, there is a non-compete clause. So that, you know, that's what it is. So it's got a change of pace to it. I'm sure that there'll be questions asked about legal and so forth, but that's what it is. House Bill 2425 allows tax credit for 2 years to be used for capital. So it's not just things that have been done in the past. If you want to buy from tax credit, things for a program, musical instruments, whatever it might be, you can now do that for up to a 2-year window. The auditor selection one that you probably are familiar with, that was a 3-year limitation on the audit firm, has now been removed. So it's back to where it was. And there was a clause in the statute that required you to select the lowest qualified bidder. That has been removed. So now it is back to where it was. So it's a mirror image of not this last year, but the year before. State board, you now need to train through the state board 1 K-3 teacher in each school to recognize dyslexia. In Senate Bill 1456, you need to provide vision screening to all students. And in 1468, you have to have staff training for grades 6 through 12 beginning in 2020 for suicide prevention. So those are the major changes. I should move on to that next slide because it's got the dollars connected with it. Results-based funding.
Would you like to take questions now or at the
Yeah,
end?
maybe that's better before we move on to this one. So whatever I
Board
can.
Member Beckham has a question, and then Board Member Kravitz.
On SB 1161, which is, I know the public's very interested in, when does that start to take effect? When are
July 1st.
July 1st, so on July 1, we are required to give them that number? So you'll be able to provide us also with a list
If
we
the
happen to
district
have any
governing board
properties?
wants to identify that they have surplus space, then that requirement would become effective July 1st, 2019.
Oh, the governing board has the authority
Well,
to determine? I
the
thought it was a
district
requirement for
sends the
everybody.
list to SFB. So the district, I assume, as you guys, are going to need to concur or not concur with whatever we decide we want to submit to SFB. Districts will play games with this. There's no question about it. I mean, this is not one of those more straightforward things. If you got a maintenance department that took half the school, then it's not vacant. Of course it's not. So it depends on how you choose to define vacancy, where you choose to put programs, where you know, all of those things are a governing board determination, especially if you're into school closure,
And they're
as to
expect-
what alternate uses you want those facilities to be put to.
And they're expecting us to determine that by July 1, 2019?
That's when this SFB requirement is that they start this list. I'm sure that
There's no
districts
drop-dead
districts will
deadline
drag their
to
feet on
Okay.
submitting the list, and
Sure.
SFB will wind up sooner or later saying to everybody,
Wait,
where's
wait.
your list at?
All right, so I'm going to make an assumption, or do we need to, I don't know if we need to vote on this in the future, that we start to look at that then, if it is a requirement by the state, and that will be forthcoming sooner than what I would have thought. I didn't realize it was going to be so.
I think after the district gets done with this facility planning subject, that's probably the time then to decide where you're
We
at
have
with
that
that,
much
because it
leeway.
affects
Okay.
all kinds of other decisions that you would make.
I believe we're also beginning to already look at that and put some data together. It was suggested as a future agenda item previously, and I know that leadership is taking a look at that currently.
All right, great. And then under SB 1071, what is our current evaluation rate? And so is that changing, or
Jed, are you here?
is that something that's going to affect SUSD? I guess that's my question.
I know, I'm confused by that language.
My question was, I'm not sure that I understand the legislation.
It sounds like instead of giving us a range, they are just saying it needs to be 33%. And I know that we have a specific percentage And I just didn't know if
I believe
ours
it's
was,
currently 33%.
so if ours is currently 33, then SB 1071 wouldn't affect us.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, odd language there.
And I guess what I would, for SB 1022, I guess I would be interested in knowing administration's view of, because it sounds like we have a choice whether we change or not, if the administration is interested in changing or not. I can see from a board member's position, I would be interested in keeping it at 1,000 hours, but I would be interested in knowing that. For the future.
We have no plans to come with any change of school times for this year,
Okay.
for instructional minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Kravitz.
My question relates to HB 2425, which allows tax credit funds to use for selected capital items. I saw a principal in the back give a yay rah symbol. So I'm just curious, so will this allow, some schools hypothetically collect a lot in tax credit funds. Will this then allow them to purchase items such as computers that they might be able to use during the regular school day?
It says
as opposed to
capital.
just
you know,
after-
So yes.
Okay,
yes.
just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Mr. Gadd, do we have regulations on that yet, or usually that follows a couple of months after the enactment of the bills, if there's something that requires time limits and any other kinds of restrictions?
I don't think so. It's got the 2-year restriction. So it reverts back to where it was before then. And playground equipment is mentioned, but I've been told now that when it's using the word equipment, I mean, it means capital. So, you know, even though there's a specific citation in there on playground equipment, I'm being told that it's much broader than that, and so fine, then, I mean, people I'm sure would like it to be as broad as possible.
And this also goes into effect July 1st?
As soon as the 90 days is up, the governor's
Okay, sorry.
signature, yeah.
There was a presentation that I was at the other
Okay.
day that was in regards to this, and they said that the law says July 1st, but because of when the governor signed it, there's a date range of what you had to do. It's actually August 27th. And the other part of that is it can only be undesignated funds. So if you have tax credit in other accounts that isn't in your undesignated, you
Right.
can't use that for capital. It has to be what's sitting in your undesignated.
Great.
And
Thank you.
can it be money that you currently have, that you've accrued?
Yes.
Or is it, okay, so it's not just new money? Okay,
No, it's not just new money, it's the money that you have within your undesignated at this time.
thank
One
you.
more question.
Board Member Beckham has one more question.
There's 2 bills that require training, and do we have the funds in our budget to go ahead for this coming up year, provide the training?
Sure will comply, yes.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any further questions for this slide?
Even though I might point out that those are, again, unfunded mandates from the state, but we will comply. For example, the suicide prevention, that has been part of our training this year with social emotional learning, and we are going, we adopted a bid from Jewish Family Services, Counseling Services, for social emotional learning, and so this will be part of that during the year.
Hey, Madam President, members of the board, second slide and the last one. This is the money slide. Results-based funding expanding quite a bit dollar-wise, currently 40, adds another 30 million. Very clear on majority of the money going to the school that earned it and not spreading it around with other institutions. And that was one of the issues that came up repeatedly is this replication subject, and how far can that go? Well, according to somebody here at least, it doesn't go very far because it rewards the staff that earned it. So that's what that one is all about. Add more funds to capital outlay restoration covers 2 years. So this additional $3 million that you saw earlier basically is the added capital we will not see for next year, another addition, but we will in year 5 receive the last addition. So the amount that we have currently in the budget is the amount that we're going to be given for both this coming year and the year after. There's a safety grant of $15 million that has, it looks like social services in it to me. It looks like it has counselors, looks like it has security, personnel, it's fairly broad. It's a grant-based program that you would have to submit a grant to the state for. Quality pilot program, 3 years at $400 each. Again, you'd have to, it's a program that you would have to submit a grant application for and know more of the details than what the summary legislation requires. Building repairs, there's a large amount of money added to the School Facilities Board for building maintenance. And districts, especially more rural districts that have limited capital funds, can take advantage of that. 2% inflation plus the 5% teacher salary increase, and then there's $1 million for gifted education. Not sure exactly what that does, but that is the earmark for it. So that's the list. Dollar-wise, not a lot of money going to anything other than what we already knew about 2020.
But in anticipation of some of these bills that were working their way through the legislature that had, there were grant-based amounts. We have, as you may remember, we have transferred an administrator into the Ed Services Department to work on special projects and grants. So we did not have a grant writer, and so now we do have that. And so she will begin to explore this after July 1st and write grants, see what we can get.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Gadd. Okay, we move now to public comments.
We have no cards.
I have no cards, so I have no public comments, I don't think. Okay, moving to our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Oh, wait, I have a question.
Yes, Board Member Kravitz.
Oh, I have a question about item JLDB. I had asked Dr. Precard about some of the wording on that one.
Yes, on
didn't know if you
that,
had an answer.
we're asking for approval, but we are committed to a clarification on that page. It says schools will. That's the way the legislature was written. When they say schools will, they mean school districts. But so we're going to say the school district will, in those cases, not individual schools to develop those plans, but the district will.
Okay, because it's written schools, not school
And
districts,
that-
so
and
that's why
that's
my question
legislative
was-
talk for meaning us.
Oh, okay, as long as we're clear on that.
Yeah.
Well, I asked the same question. The definition is on the bottom. I had suggested moving the definitions to the top.
my bad.
And if
Okay,
you,
sorry.
well, no, I did the same thing you did, but if we move the definitions, that
It is.
also
I'm
helps
sorry. I just
to
didn't-
clarify, because it is not
Thank
100%
you.
clear in my
Thank
view
you.
either.
Sorry.
Okay.
Can I just get clarification? Am I just adding districts or am I moving things down?
No, it's okay now that we know.
I can put it up if we're going to make more changes, but I need to know what you want.
I think to have it in the text, the school district will, makes most sense. People don't have to look for it.
I'll do it.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, anything further? All right, we're moving to
You
our,
going to vote?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
I make a motion to approve our consent agenda as amended without item 14K, the approval of annual renewal of intergovernmental agency, or IGA, between SUSD and EVIT, provision of joint technical education district courses, JTED, and 14F, personnel action item, removing Robert Scavetta. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz, seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes with a 5-0 vote.
So President Beckman, if I may, please, at this time, two people that you have approved, one is a transfer and one is a new hire I'd like to recognize tonight. First of all, Bob Akbari, who has been an assistant principal in our district for some time at several schools. And we are very pleased to announce Robert is now the new principal at Desert Canyon Middle School, and I believe he also has family members with him this evening. And also Mr. Tim Eierman, who is the new principal at Copper Ridge K-8 school. Mr. Eierman comes to us with a degree in history from Allegheny College. We are trying to accumulate as many history majors as possible in this district. and has 2 Masters of Arts degrees, one from ASU and one from University of Phoenix. Most recently, he has worked as the Senior Director of Charter School Advisory for BASIS out of Washington, D.C., and we are happy to have him back in the Valley, and welcome to Scottsdale, Tim.
Okay.
That's it.
We move now to our action items. 15A, the approval of construction manager at risk contract form for Hohokam Elementary School project. Do I have any questions or discussion from board members? Board Member Beckham.
I brought this up, but I'm still having trouble with it as it reads, and I don't know if we can amend it, or, I guess, it says that we are approving the form, but we're not approving the form. So I just want to get the wording clear, that what are we exactly approving? Because I'm not approving this as a form.
Go ahead.
Thank you for your question. Sorry, I didn't see a microphone over there. It's my understanding that you're approving the actual contract. The form of contract is the exact same format, the same terms with different dollar amounts and percentages as what you had for the Cherokee agreement. So it is that agreement. And so when I saw your question, I requested the actual contract and sent it out to the board members today. I know that's late, but that is what you are being asked to approve.
Well, I didn't receive the actual contract to read. The 2 things that I learned from it that pose a little bit of a problem is that, unless that has changed also, is that in that form, it's not just for the pre-construction services, it's also, because the contract includes the next approval as well, and it has not been determined or negotiated what that fee would be. So I don't know about the other board members, but I'm not comfortable approving a contract in which I don't know what the fee is. I'm also a little surprised because I thought, is Chase building team not on the co-op? Because the co-op has a range of,
Contractors are not on co-op.
it's not on the co-op, so it is. So I guess I will be abstaining because I haven't read the contract and I don't agree with approving a contract that we don't know the negotiated fee for.
I think, Madam President, members of the board, Ms. Beckham, I think you're referring to the construction services line that's blank in the contract. That was,
No, I haven't seen it. I was just told that it had not been determined yet. So that's why I said,
That's
has that been
correct.
changed?
yeah, and that's the one that CORE also has, and it was a 5% number, and that's the number that we intend to tell Chase that we intend to insert into the contract.
So
So
it has
do
been
you know that-
negotiated at 5%?
Uh-huh. And that is
so
at
it
the
has
low end of the range, and that's what we will demand that occurs.
Just for clarification, has the other party agreed to that?
But
Because
they
it
will,
wasn't in the
they will after we
contract.
talk to them.
Okay, so what you're approving today,
I'll be abstaining.
what you
just-
would be approving today is the contract with just the pre-construction amount in there as indicated on Mr. Gadd's agenda item. I believe it was 120.
0.6. Okay, so
Okay.
can I get clarity from that because I have it in front of me?
Yes.
So this is we are approving this pre-construction contract, and you have an estimated value of 20 million. The percentage of construction costs at 0.60%, and pre-construction services at 120,000 based on that 0.6. And then in below, it says the contract also addresses construction services if and only if the board approves a GMP submitted by the Chase building team.
Right.
Correct?
There will be another agenda item in September or October, September probably, that asks the board to approve a GMP. That is also the same time, I'm told by legal counsel, that you could insert that percentage for construction fee, which is basically the profit percentage. That's what that means. And you could do that at the time that you approve the GMP. It doesn't matter whether you do it now or whether you do it then, because the only approval to proceed is with pre-construction only.
So So I'm having a little bit of deja vu here because this is the exact same process we use for Cherokee. And again, at that time, there were questions about why does the contract have both pre-construction and construction as part of it, and we were told by our outside attorney, counsel, that that is the form that is currently being used, industry standard, and that the construction portion does not kick in until the GMP is approved by the board. But that is the form that we used for that service as well.
Board Member Greenberg had a question first. Board Member Greenberg?
I will admit that I agree with Board Member Beckham to the point that we did not actually have the contract, and even if it is the same, I can understand a trepidation to approving it. But I just refresh my memory. So if we're this contract approved the construction manager at risk for the rebuild remodel of Hohokam. This is for the actual rebuild that we're telling them we want you to move forward, we want you guys to do the construction. And then the pre-construction services,
The pre-construction services are the time the contractor will spend, Mr. Greenberg, with the architect in formulating a guaranteed maximum price. If that number is unacceptable to the district, then there will be no further implementation of the contract. It would involve only what you have here in your agenda item, the $120,000. So the only thing that you are approving now is for this particular contractor to proceed with the architect in developing a GMP. If the GMP is unacceptable to you in the end, you're done with this contractor and you move on to someone else.
So
Board Member
may
Beckham.
I offer one option
I was
that
the option.
you can consider, and it's noticed appropriately for you to do so, is to simply approve the pre-construction amount only. That will allow you to, the work to proceed on pre-construction, and when they are ready with the other figures, they can bring back the full contract with all the terms in there and ask you to approve that and the GMP. Jeff, is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Can I also make another suggestion, which I think is what we started to do in the past, because it's really not up to the governing board to be reading these contracts and approving the contracts, and that was my point that I tried to give a couple of days ago. So what we ended up, I believe, doing under Cherokee is that we approved for the pre-construction services, and the percentage was given, dollar amount. We didn't have a dollar amount under Cherokee. It's why I voted no on that. We do under this particular contract, and it was to be not in excess of the 120, because when I had asked Dennis afterwards, were we really going to spend 140,000 on Cherokee, he said, no, it's
Not
up
to exceed.
to that point because we actually take in the work that they have done. So we need to make sure the wording is correct as well on our agenda and
I
what we're
believe
approving.
that's in the agenda.
But it's not on this
Is it not
form.
as a not to exceed? I think it is.
So-
Yeah.
Yeah, but it says, it doesn't say not to
Oh, I
exceed
thought
the
it was in the item.
120,
No?
which is what
And
it
if you'd
needs
like
to
to add
exceed.
that
It
to the
doesn't,
motion,
it
that
needs
would be
to say
fine.
that. But
That's fine.
what we can do is we can approve, and what we should be doing, I think, is approving for those pre-construction services with Chase Building Team with that negotiated amount. We're not, the board's not approving the contract. We're allowing you to, authorizing you then to go forward and do the contract.
If you do not
And then-
approve the contract,
Well, we
You-
approve a contract, but we're not actually
Yes.
going in and approving every detail of
we're
that
going to
contract.
still bring back to you a contract that has all the correct terms in there. You're not expected to be a construction attorney
Right.
and advocate as an attorney on behalf of the board, but it is our duty to bring you a contract and show you what we're proposing to enter into.
Correct, and that's fine, you can show it to us, but that's why the wording, I feel, is so important in how it is worded and what we're actually approving. Then we can next approve the construction for the contractor. I just happen to need to know what that negotiated fee is. The rest of the board members may not need to be able to know what that is.
So are the board members clear on what your options are here? I'm not sure you are.
Board Member
Okay.
Greenberg has a question too.
well, I was just going to point out that generally speaking, as board of directors, we are allowed to rely on experts in the field who have done this work for us, so long as we have no reason not to believe them. So, yeah. And I do trust that if the contract terms are the same as what we're using with Cherokee, then, I trust that is the case.
Do I have a motion? Are we modifying this?
I think you want to approve the $120,000 pre-construction as a not-to-exceed amount.
Correct, but also for
And
pre-construction
using
only.
Chase building
Yeah.
team. Is that-
That's actually in there as a separate item, approval of the RFQ. Is that, yeah.
That's B.
That's the
So
next
that would
item.
be that's your next action
That's your
item.
next item.
So I thought the agreement was, it's not with Chase,
It is with,
It's a
It is
site.
with
It is
Chase.
with Chase.
It is with Chase.
it's
No,
the
but-
second, first you're going to possibly approve a not-to-exceed amount for pre-construction services at $120,000.
The recommendation does say Chase
It does
on
say
this
Chase.
first
Okay.
one, A too.
Maybe those should have been reversed.
Because I was under the understanding the second
Well,
one was
both of
for
them
the
do.
actual construction. The first is for the pre-construction,
Correct.
for Chase Building Team to be that contractor. The second one is for construction and to come up with the GMP. And if the GMP is approved by us, then it by default becomes Chase Building Team.
Yeah, B probably should precede A. I mean, I guess, you award the RFQ, and then you turn around and enter into an agreement on pre-construction services. So, yeah, we just don't have the correct order.
That's why I was confused, because I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you.
So would the board like to first approve the RFQ? You can just say which item and do that, and then,
Are we making a motion on A, or are we going to move to the RFQ first and then come back to A? What do you advise?
it sounds as though you want to do it in a logical order, which would make sense to do the RFQ item first.
Table A, go to B, and then
Okay,
come back.
I
and-
move to table action item 15A for 5 minutes, I suppose, while we move. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Moving on to 15B, approval of award RFQ to 20,000, construction manager at risk for Hohokam Elementary School to Chase Building Team. Is there any questions or discussion from board members?
Was that what you just approved, I think?
No, we just tabled A. Now we're moving B and we're voting on
Sorry,
it, and then
okay,
we're going to go
got
back to A. Okay. Board Member Beckham.
So does this include,
If voting yes on this, is this voting to approve Chase Building Team as the contractor at a negotiated rate of 5% or a negotiated rate to be determined?
I don't know what the RFQ said.
What does the
It's
RFQ say?
Simply, it's not setting anything at this point
Okay.
with approval of the RFQ to this individual, except they have been approved for the RFQ. Does not
Okay.
specify any numbers of any kind.
Okay, all right then, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, I make a motion to approve action item 15B, the approval of award RFQ 20,000, construction manager at risk, CMAR, for Hohokam Elementary School to Chase Building Team. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. We move back to or on to 15A now. Approval of construction manager at risk, contract form for Hohokam Elementary School. Are there any questions on 15A? Any further questions? Someone would like to make a motion?
So moved.
Well-
Whatever 15A is, which is.
You need to add the not to exceed.
I feel we modified it correctly. Okay, so I move, unless you'd like to.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Because I think I have it.
You go then.
Okay, I move to approve action item 15A, the approval of. Oh, no, it's 15.
No, it's 15.
15A, it's normally 14A. 15A, the approval of construction manager at risk, contract form for Hohokam Elementary School to Chase not to exceed $120,000 for pre-construction services.
Yes.
Good. Do I have a second?
Second. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Who second? Board
Board
Member
Member Kravitz.
Kravitz, second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes 5-0.
All righty.
Okay, moving on now to 15C. Second read of the approval of revisions to policy BEDB. Are there any questions or discussion on this second read of approval of revisions to policy BEDB? Any questions? Is your light on? Or no? Okay. All right, do I have a motion then to approve action item?
Well, sorry.
I'd like to pull it up. I think there was
Okay.
Yeah.
one correction that Dr. Creekheart and I discussed. I want
Great.
to make sure you guys understand what we're talking about here. As a reminder to anyone listening, the last time the board had an information discussion item regarding this policy, which lists the approval of agenda items, and specifically the board talked about whether to move the public comment, otherwise known as call to the public, whether to have at least two opportunities for public comment. And the discussion among board members last time was perhaps you would like to have an opportunity to have an item for non-agenda items as public comment, and then separately allow the public to comment on agenda items as they come up. I asked, we were modeling on Paradise Valley Schools policy, but looking at their policy, it was not obvious that that's what they do. So I asked our newest assistant superintendent, Kim Guerin, how does this work? And she explained that where we normally have public comment, they have the same thing, but just for non-agenda items. So anybody can come up and talk about anything they want to that's not on the agenda at the public comment time. And then people fill out the other card for agenda items, and they have an opportunity to make their comment as the board discusses those. When I spoke with Dr. Creekheart this morning, he indicated that he thinks that they do that for action items as they come up, that the board has its discussion and then invites the public to comment. I don't know if that reflects what you were explaining to me.
Right, that's, as I remember, but that, not claiming 100% memory anymore. So I think the way it's written now, that as items, whether they be information items or agenda items, would be open for public comment on a separate card. And so how that would work here would be after the original public comment on items that are not on the agenda. And if you think back, probably 98% of the public comment that we've had in this past year are on non-agenda items or in separate issues out there in the community. So then as we have an information item, we provide all the information, you have your questions, and we go back and forth. And when you're done, then the board president says, do we have any cards for call to the public on this item? And then someone from the public may come in and say whatever they would like to say on it. When it comes to an action item, it happens the exact same way, except you then ask for, after the public comment, and that may spur more board discussion, but then you call for a motion and then you pass. That gives, it does a couple of things I found. One is it keeps the call to the public, the general call to the public, isolated just to those issues that they want to talk about that you cannot respond to, generally because they're not on the agenda. And rather than have people give comments at that time about something that's on the action agenda list, and then they leave, and then you have your vote, your discussion, your vote. You may answer their questions. You may take their comment into your view as you look at the item. But it involves the public. I think it's a better way of involving the public on that item alone. Now, again, remember, it doesn't happen often, But if it is a sticky kind of agenda item, what I heard was you wanted to hear from the public, but in a more directive way on that agenda item, and just on that agenda item as it comes up. It doesn't, in Paradise Valley, I'm told it doesn't happen very often, but it does sometimes, and the people feel they have a direct part of the discussion with the board on that item, and it creates a better collaborative environment.
So if I'm sorry, Board Member Greenberg? Jump in front.
You can go and I can go next.
So if I'm understanding, and this is the way I had originally thought it would be, that there would be public comment after the superintendent's comments
Right.
on non-agenda items.
Right.
And then as we hit the action items, there would be a call to the public at the beginning of each action item, or would it be
No, I
Yeah.
really believe it's as
as they come?
after you've had your discussion, then you say, now, is there anyone from the
Right.
public that has anything to say based on cards?
And then you vote.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
I actually do have one question about that. It doesn't sound like people come up and comment about the myriad of things that wind up on a consent agenda. I'm not sure how you would like to handle that. It could be, we could write it so that it's part of the general public comments, non-agenda items and consent agenda items, or I don't know that that comes up that often in PV, but I didn't have an understanding of how that would work.
You mean if someone wanted to comment on consent?
There's a lot that you approve on consent because it doesn't necessarily need discussion, but someone might want to come comment on that. Personnel
I
action
think
item,
your
things like that.
suggestion works, because we don't want to start pulling items on the consent agenda because one single member of the community wants to ask questions about it. If they ask questions ahead of time and spur questions with us when they come to us before, then, that's why sometimes items are pulled from consent agenda, because of discussion needed. But I think it makes sense so it would be consent agenda, non-agenda items and consent agenda.
Okay.
Is that,
Does non-agenda exclude consent?
No, it's the two categories. Either it's not on the agenda at all, or it's on the consent agenda, and that's the sort of everybody
Yeah.
come up and
Right.
make your comment at that time.
Board Member Greenberg?
You mentioned, President Beckman, that exactly what I wanted to ask was, I thought the general call to public for non-agenda and consent agenda items would occur after the superintendent's comments, not after information discussion items.
That sounds like that was your understanding, so move that up.
that's what we said.
Yeah, no, but
Okay.
it's just not written there.
Yeah, no, that's not how we had it, so
No, it was after.
it would
It was
Yeah,
be
after
switched.
like this.
information
Yeah,
discussion
like it is
items.
now.
Okay.
Because the idea was so that people that were in attendance could hear what the goings-on in the district, the improvements going on in our schools, et cetera.
Right, and then they have their call to item. If they want to talk about an item that's on the information or the action items, then they would fill out a card for that agenda item. And so those people that are just here through the recognition and the superintendent's comments and the call to the public, then their business is over. They go ahead and leave if that's what they want. And those that want to talk to a specific item will talk at that time.
Might they just get moved?
So what I did is move the call to the public up after superintendent comments and before information discussion. I
No,
add,
it's supposed to be after
sorry?
the-
Was that,
What,
So we're supposed to have the public comment right after superintendent's comments. That is non-agenda items and consent agenda.
And I
And
made-
then
right.
the other one is at the action item.
And then what I did down here is added for items listed on the agenda as either, I can say either information discussion items or action items. The public will be afforded an opportunity to comment
So
on those items.
On information discussion items even, not even action items, they still have to wait.
We still,
Until, yeah.
That's what we discussed then.
Right.
Well,
As
and-
they come up for discussion?
And as I've said before, not to belabor this, I think this is a nice compromise so that when we have someone, a mom that wants to come and just talk about what's going on at her school necessarily and get going, she has an opportunity to do so without impacting, you know, her life or evening or babysitters, et cetera. And the others that rightfully so need to probably hear what we're discussing when it relates to an action item and maybe propose solutions before they have formed their opinion, you know, about just the agenda per se, can listen and hear before, and weigh in before we take a vote. So, is there any other discussions or questions? Board Member Perleberg?
And I'll just emphasize that because I absolutely agree. It captures still the intent that past governing board and this current governing board is really trying to do, and that's a productive engagement with our community. And I think the addition tonight of the idea of public comment being held after information discussion item until, I mean, any comments, our community still will hear that information discussion item first. And even though there may not be action on that item, they're still hearing what is going on in the district and why some of the changes they may, you know, are happening. And
Right.
so I think it flows well. It'll be a challenge, but I think I think it works. It makes sense to me.
So this is a second read, and you have the opportunity to approve it today, or if you want more discussion, we can bring it back in August. We will be working on revising the comment cards.
Of course. Board Member Beckham?
I'll make a motion that we approve,
With that change.
where is it? BEDB, is that it?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yep. As amended.
Okay, I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Great, okay, we move on to action item 15D, the approval of the superintendent's 2019-2020 performance-based compensation goals. Are there any questions or is there any discussion from board members?
If I may, President Beckman.
Yeah.
So I hoped that you all received not only what Mrs. Marshall presented as a recap of the previous discussion, and my first attempt, I really meant this just to be a first draft of possible performance-based pay goals, as well as the quarterly expectations and priorities. And then in conversation with with board members, not in groups more than two, that some other suggestions were made. For example, on the performance-based goals, it was recommended that perhaps we keep those to be shorter and more specific, so that at the end of the year, when you as board members are looking at the 1% that is in the superintendent's contract for performance pay, that either it has been accomplished or it hasn't been, and it's clear cut. So I did try, and if we look first as we are at this item, looking first at the performance-based goals, and when I had listed 4 of them, which I had hoped were indicative of those areas that you recommended in the past board. So the first having to do with program and facility plans for the learning communities, and so maybe the actual goal is, because as a result of our facility plans and a look at each learning community, probably starting out with Saguaro, because that's the most pressing, I think, right now. As a result of those plans, knowing what capacity is and looking at those facilities again, perhaps if the goal that you decide on would be to simply that the superintendent recommends the next bond project, or if you want more than one, 2 bond projects to the governing board. Make that recommendation. So that would be as a result of the study of the programs. Secondly, I had included some updates on the Coronado Learning Community Success Initiative, and maybe that really should show, by the end of next school year, show proof of academic progress in the Coronado Learning Community on the district metrics, which we are now using, and we will have some of those ready before June 30th next year if the current disbursement of test results and so forth continues for next year. The third one, dealing with social emotional learning and mental health programs, just to simply put that we will train all school staff in social emotional learning procedures, and that also meets the part of that meets the new law that was passed, and that's easily accounted for with you. Either we've trained all school staffs or we haven't, or if we have trained and I could, if I've done that as it should be done, then I would present to you the calendar of when each school staff was trained and easily proved. And then the fourth one having to do with communication, and one of the things that had been suggested is conducting, we're calling office hours, or I think Sandra has some ideas about coffee with Crecard or something like that in each learning community. So we conduct those community office hours in each learning community. What I had originally thought was to show an increase in all communication with schools, with communities, with the board over time, and keeping a running log. But again, that's not an increase is not as objective as what the other board members had suggested. So I'm sorry that all kind of changed and was done hurriedly this week, but after consultation. And I don't have a problem, frankly, if we discuss this, take other suggestions, and come back in August with something written hard on hard paper so you can review it and so forth. So that, as far as performance pay goals, those are suggestions that I have at this point.
Questions, discussion from board members? Board Member Beckham.
This isn't a straightforward, easy conversation because it is very comprehensive, and we're dealing with 2 separate areas. And I think that we might have different ideas of what those areas mean. I think a lot of what you just said, I would have put, in more of the quarterly expectation, because those are things that are ongoing, that are happening. I was thinking more performance-based goals, thinking, one of our biggest issues is enrollment. And that one of them would be that we have increasing enrollment. And then with that and we can measure that. And we put an actual number, what that enrollment, measurement would be. And then how you determine as the superintendent, with your vision and your expertise, on how you're going to increase that enrollment. Then you would come back and, that would be with your staff and your cabinet, and then implementing those strategies. But I was thinking of more taking larger goals, like, the things that we're really looking at moving this district forward, which we know, especially in finance, is, increased enrollment. It also provides us to be able not just to have additional funds per se, but additional programs. Having those funds then strengthens the experience and the programming and the curriculum, and being able to hire veteran teachers, more of them, and more effective teachers. So to me, I'm looking more for that type of a goal. So I don't know how if anybody else was looking at that level.
Board Member Perliberg.
Thank you. I'll try and clarify, because a lot of discussion Dr. Kikard spoke about was with me. So I think we have to distinguish here the difference between the concept of performance goals and performance-based compensation goals. Because the performance-based compensation goals, which we're discussing now, are the items that we will sit at some point next year, whenever, May, I think, and say,
April.
Did Dr.
February.
Kikard meet these specific performance-based compensation goals? And we then will give him the 1% bonus, whatever we call it, compensation, that 1% small amount. Will we give him that full amount? And if in that discussion with the board, if those goals that we've kind of laid out are very broad, are large, somewhat subjective, that conversation for the governing board is always very, very difficult. If we have chosen very specific goals that are more like something like a checklist, did this job get done? Our recent one was, did the employee handbook get done? That those things in this particular conversation is much easier, both for the board and for the superintendent. And when always you're looking at this 1% dollar amount, it's just, I mean, from experience, we all say it's much easier if we're very honed in on specific items that are rather objective. And then, of course, when we look at true performance of the superintendent.
For the
goals,
evaluation.
For the evaluation, right. I agree with you, is a different conversation, a different definition of what we're looking for in those goals. So for this purpose of these goals, yes, I would very much.
So you're saying enrollment is going to be in the evaluation of goals, not in the compensation?
So I would personally, as a board member, caution this board against saying, when we're discussing, does the superintendent receive his 1% performance pay compensation? Did he earn that? I would question a decision where the board says, we're going to tell the superintendent we want a 2% increase in enrollment, and only if that happens, you get this compensation package. That would be
I understand
very odd, especially considering how small this compensation is, performance compensation.
Well, there you have another factor. How much value are you putting on, since it's 1%? So if we're putting very little value on what these are, and that we just need to pick some things out there and, they're done, that's fine. But I do think enrollment is a very measurable, objective goal that is maybe easier than just program plans. And I think that you actually recommended 2 bond projects.
But I think, again,
But
to
I
the
understand
point
your
is,
point
we
because
would
of
place that in another area of goals.
I just don't want,
not
so
this
I think
particular
then
one.
that we have to understand that the focus is fairly light here then on performance-based goals, right?
Because we're looking at a very small percentage of compensation for the
Okay.
superintendent.
And as long as we know that going forward, then I can. I just am really looking, you hear performance-based goals and you think, okay, that's where you're going to put some focus. And you put focus on it, but I don't want those to distract from the bigger goals that we definitely need to be addressing, and that is enrollment.
And that's why I think it's important that we clarify, when we're saying here performance-based compensation goals, we're talking about a very specific small amount that is in the superintendent's contract. And I believe it is legislatively required for us to review a compensation bonus for the superintendent, and we lay out the goals for him to receive that bonus. I don't think bonus is the preferred word for it, by the way. But that is how the perception is. And so when you are talking about this small bonus, I think the discussion just, I mean, in the past, I've been on boards where it was very broad, and you're like, what do we even do this? It's not very meaningful.
I believe we need to make them measurable, but how does the rest of the board feel
evaluation
so
and
that we can have a
performance goals
consensus?
overall, again, different conversation, and I agree with your
And
goals.
that's where we should be putting our
Board
time and
Member
energy.
Greenberg.
Yes.
I guess I think the origin of the quarterly meetings and reevaluating how we do the performance-based goals and what we set was the idea that we did have maybe certain projects or something that we wanted to be done in the year and evaluated. I do think, for example, I think it would, I mean, it is certainly measurable and objective to say we want the enrollment decline is expected to be 500 ADM, we want it to be 350 ADM instead, slow down that loss. There are ways of quantifying it that make sense and are measurable. I guess my question would be, if we don't put those in the, I have my own specific things that I would like to see done, when do we discuss that?
Well, that would have been, and I think I understand what Board Member Perleberg was saying, and Board Member Beckham, is you have 3 areas. We've added that third. And the first one would have been the superintendent's review overall. You would have set those goals when you decide to give him another contract. How did you do previously? These are our expectations of you to receive yet another one next year. Here's the parameters by which we would measure your success. And then you would discuss those, and those would be broader, and maybe something like that would, and then the performance-based goals would be kind of a derivative of, these are some, smaller areas that if you exceed even, and you are able to achieve these, you performed well, and you get this extra additional. And then these quarterly meetings were even further on down the line of, we have some priorities that we're laying out. They almost can be like a one and done that we'd like to see achieved, or focused on, because there's a list of 100, and we can pick and choose, but the board currently would like you to see these 4 or 2 or whatever done immediately. And that's how I see this. And so these bigger picture items, we would have maybe discussed overall. And I don't know if you all agree
Right.
with Board Member Greenberg?
So
Did we
No.
actually have that?
No, we didn't, because we're trying to be consistent over time, and we adopted in December a set of metrics that we had kind of piloted. The district had piloted the year before. We cleaned them up. Last year presented them, so we have those. We won't have the results of where we stand on all of those criteria in the metrics probably until September ish, by the time, because they're not just AZ merit, but they're graduation things, and there are other number of honors courses that people have signed up for at the various levels, et cetera. So that would be a discussion at that time. I will tell you now that I've been sharing with Cabinet that I believe we need to have a focus on instructional practices, and so we have been exploring with a couple of different consulting firms on training to improve instructional leadership at the schools, and not able to come to you yet because we haven't gotten to an agreement with everybody. Is charging more than we think they should, but we have some plans, and some of that is we have a group of administrators right now who are at the Model Schools Conference, and they're working with Dr. Bill Daggett because he has an interest in Scottsdale. He came here for one of the all-day PD sessions. So they're working with him at the Model Schools Conference, and then seeing different school presentations in these areas. And so they will come back with theirs. So we've been talking about instruction, and we've been talking a lot about facilities and facility planning as well. So what I would like to see is the performance pay things be specific, but yet tied to those larger goals. Be subsets of that larger goal, and that's what I tried to do in what I was proposing. So then, and I've added enrollment and other things that may come up as in our September-ish kind of role. But enrollment, we know now, is a continuing issue, has been a continuing issue for some time, and I appreciate the the sense of, to change a 600 student decline to positive numbers in 1 year is be glad that I won't be looking for a contract next year. But it is something that we need to work on, and I believe that we have been working on, both in terms of marketing our district through the communication department, and in terms of our talks with principals about customer relationships and about student focus and responsiveness and those things that we have. So we also have that playbook that we had from the board, and there are tasks in those. We call them the buckets, and we have the tasks. And so to look through those tasks and maybe start to look at those in our next agenda item on the quarterly meetings, to look at those tasks also, to set those up as part of quarterly meetings is something that I could also do to add to this if we wanted to wait until August, because I apologize I wasn't as ready as I should have been for this. Things changed, but
Well, I think
I
we all
apologize.
needed a little further clarification on how we viewed this individually as well, as this got laid out. So this discussion was good, prompting maybe some further questions. Any other questions? Board Member Greenberg?
So specific tasks then would fall under the expectations and priorities? Is that my understanding?
I would like to see there are some specific tasks that you as a board together or as individual board members would like to see us accomplish at certain times of the year. And an example of that was last fall. There were a number of things that we were tasked to accomplish by the end of the first semester. And so that's where the quarterly meetings come in. But I think there should also be updates on the overall performance goals, not the performance pay necessarily, but which would be part of it, but on the performance goals as well as part of those quarterly meetings.
Is that the thematic goals?
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I had that down as well, too, for the quarterly expectations.
Any further questions or discussion? So, I'm not sure.
No. The only thing,
Board Member Rebecca.
I just want to make sure that when we finally finalize these performance-based goals, that we really that we all understand what that measurement is. Because that's we just need to kind of run it through everybody and say, okay, let's give each one a little hypothetical. Do we all understand? We don't need to do that in public, but before that we approve these, that we know what the measurements are.
Right, and so part of what I will present to you will also include the evidence that I expect to give you to show that I've accomplished that. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Board Member Perleberg.
And again, I'll just try and clarify again, because the expectation is that, we have this small list of goals tied to a small dollar amount. Then, of course, there's always been the expectation that in the fall, August, September, and I know in previous discussions, it was laid out to really lay out meaningful performance goals, not performance-based content, but real performance goals tied to data and stuff, that is much more beneficial once we have AZ Merit scores and have a clear look of where our academics are in the district. And I know that was part of the discussion of placement of creating those goals until after those, we have those AZ Merit scores, and we can really look at the district, then lay it out for the superintendent. It gives our superintendent a challenge of then hitting the ground running for that school year. But, and again, like I said, I completely support in those discussions and in those laying out those goals. Yes, those are much bigger and they're broader and they're the overall place where our district, needs to get to overall, so.
So for clarity, are you potentially suggesting that we, since you've said that these, you see them, and I'm trying to kind of get something concisely laid out in my mind here, that these performance-based goals are smaller and tied to the larger overall goals. So potentially, we, and this is where I need clarity, would table this maybe until we address those bigger goals and see if these fit?
No, I'm saying there are two conversations here.
Right. But how can you-
We could sit here tonight and hash out, I mean, and I know Dr. Creekard's kind of tried to come up with some specific lists. Performance-based compensation goals is literally a list of things that next April or May, we'd be saying, did he accomplish this and earn his $1,000 bonus?
I understand that, but
And-
before you said they kind of tie and work hand in glove with the overall. So my question is do you think it's more beneficial, not necessarily that we're not, but do you think it's more beneficial as a board to wait to discuss those overall goals and then to
And then
take
pluck out?
these and address them at the same time?
What I'm hearing is our superintendent is comfortable with that. I mean, again, since it's is tied to his compensation directly. And I agree with all of you that the performance-based goals that we set for the overall superintendent evaluation are much more detailed and much larger and broader and everything. But, so yes, if our superintendent is, because I believe it's in his contract that we are supposed to lay out these specific goals tied to this bonus compensation, I believe it's in his contract, we're supposed to do this by a certain date. And we should be doing it now. So I guess I'll just ask our general counsel is it fine for us to table that if our superintendent agrees?
I think that you were very clever to get the superintendent to state in public on the record that he doesn't mind waiving that provision.
Because it's in his contract.
It is in his contract.
Yes, that we would do that.
I want to say July 1, which is why we're
I think,
trying
yeah,
to get this
yes.
this month, but as long as everyone agrees that we can postpone that, it's.
But I know we're not on the next action item but I will say, I don't think that should be the case for the priorities. So just putting that out there before we address this next one, that I can see the fit, the kind of synergy, whatever, of the two, this one and the overall performance goals, but the priorities, I think, are a little bit unique in and of themselves. So, I don't know if someone wants to make a motion or I will just say that I move to table a vote or a discussion of the approval of the superintendent's 2019-2020 performance-based compensation goals. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Kravitz seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Okay. Now we move on to our last action item, 15E, approval of the superintendent's expectations and priorities for quarterly meetings pursuant to his 2019-2020 contract. Discussion. Questions?
Sorry.
Board Member Perleberg.
I will say our easiest starting place for that is the items that Dr. Creekard, maybe in a little broader sense, but already listed for us, is that obviously work on the work that needs to get started for the recommendation of the next bond project. The CSI item, and Dr. Krieger, you'll have to help me clear what you said exactly about what you are looking at as a goal for that.
No, we're looking at under priorities now, right?
No,
Which
I'm
would
looking
be-
at the ones that you mentioned earlier in this meeting.
Those were the.
I'm saying this could be a potential starting off
Use-
point.
priorities and not
Right.
goals.
So to get started on those that are priorities, the program and facility capacities for the learning communities,
I-
the ones that I listed originally as performance-based pay goals that were too broad for that,
Right.
but could very well fit for a good start for the quarterly projects.
That is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So help me clarify
And
that.
I don't disagree, no one's up here yet, but I think that we may, and this is my thinking again, need to keep that lens and focus on, we voted on an override to be put on the November ballot, and what priorities would we like our superintendent to focus on to make us, or enable us to achieve that goal in November? And I know what our survey said, and our survey, talked about financial transparency, et cetera, that our community was very interested in seeing. Certainly, program facility plans is going to be a priority. I agree about Coronado, and I know, don't kill me for bringing this up, but I do believe that an individual internal auditor might go a long way for showing our community that we are serious about financial transparency. I'm just putting that out there. Board Member Beckham.
Don't kill the messenger here either. Under quarterly expectations, it says June, July, and August. So are what we talking about, are we asking the superintendent to be done by August 30th?
I think it's to start on these things.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I
At
didn't,
least that's
I
the
thought
one
that that
I
was,
hope.
we've
I hope
missed a
that's what
whole
it is.
month, and we've got July, and then I was thinking, oh my gosh, we're giving you the month of August to finish
Yeah.
these. So I wanted to maybe amend that.
Yeah.
So let us then put a date to what we're talking about whenever we decide those quarterly expectations and priorities, when that will actually be expected to happen, what that quarter is. So one of those that you had mentioned tonight is that you would be doing a thematic goal review.
Right.
And so I think that's something maybe that just becomes a constant in your quarterly expectations and priorities in those meetings. I don't know if it can be done in the next quarter, but I'll just throw it out there for the next 4 months. How about
Okay.
that? To look at negotiating our solar contracts.
Okay, you all are all lit
Solar
up, so I'm just
contract.
gonna, Board Member Kravitz, you're right in the middle.
As my, how do I phrase this? As my comments from our last meeting were misrepresented with regard to an internal auditor, I would like to be clear. I understand the purpose, I understand the reasons why. I think that, as we've discussed with the previous board, with Mr. Gadd, I think there are other ways of achieving the same goal. And I believe it is from bringing in an outside auditor or some other consultant to review best practices. We've had auditors in the past, twice. And from the 2015 Auditor General Report from the state of Arizona, where they say we've had costs not accurately reported. In fiscal year 2012, when I believe we had an auditor, the district did not always properly classify its expenditures in accordance with the Uniform Chart of Accounts for school districts. As a result, the district's annual financial report did not accurately reflect its costs, and its reported instructional expenditures were falsely increased by over $5 million, or 3 percentage points. Further, the district has not accurately reported its costs for many years. For example, between fiscal years 2004 and 2009, the district annually reported millions of dollars of electricity costs as instructional spending rather than plant operations spending as required by the Uniform Chart of Accounts. Additionally, in fiscal years 2012 and 2013, the district reported its costs for speech and physical therapy, guidance counseling, and psychology services for students as instructional spending, although the Uniform Chart of Accounts defines these costs as student support services. Further, in fiscal year 2014, the district began misreporting its costs for property liability insurance as instructional spending rather than plant operation spending as required by the Uniform Chart of Accounts. I don't know that having an internal auditor would solve these issues. That is why while I understand the need for fiscal accountability and transparency, I don't know that having an internal auditor will resolve those issues, and that's why I call upon hiring an outside,
Right.
nonpartisan person to suggest best practices and perhaps also suggest best ways of training our personnel.
Board Member Perleberg.
Thank you. I know from our prior discussion. That's the exact takeaway that I had, was the question of what will we get the most bang for our buck for? And we all recognize the need, we all recognize the challenges this district has had for a very, very long time. And what I recall is the discussion leading towards the idea of Mr. Gadd, administration, Dr. Creekard coming to the board with, yes, possible options, recommendations regarding how can we improve the practices in our district, and what their recommendations are on how we take a hard look on improving those practices. Not just a simple decision of an auditor or a department or anything like that. It seems like there needs to be a lot more assessment of what will be the most productive and the most valuable to our district. So I would say if that's where the discussion needs to go in the next quarter, and that is, the board agrees that that's a priority, but I would like that a shared understanding of that is what we really want to see come back to us, is that recommendation. So.
Thank you. Board Member Greenberg?
Okay. People do not trust us. And it's really that simple. And there's a reason why people don't trust us. And it's because you have had discussions in the past. Since February 26th of 2018, we've had 64 meetings, 7 to 8 of which had any discussion items whatsoever related to internal controls or the problems of what occurred or how things happened. 2 of those discussions were about policy DIE, which lasted a total of 49 minutes. And in the meantime, we spent 3 meetings discussing AVID for $100,000. And we go and visit schools, and we pour a ton of time into that. This is a government organization. We have, according to Jeff Gadd, $196 million budgeted. We have, in addition to that, the bond money. I mean, we're essentially a $250 million organization. And there's not a single $250 million organization of which I'm aware, and I'm not saying because the other school districts don't do it, that is the right position. I think quite the opposite. I think it's very clear from how internal auditing is supposed to work that it pays for itself, that it contributes a lot to efficiency. There is an entire organization dedicated to professional internal auditing, the IIA, okay? The city of Scottsdale recommends it. The people on the M&O committee recommend it. There's just not anyone here who logically looks at this and says, don't have it. I agree with Board Member Kravitz entirely. I don't think an internal auditor can really do the job that's needed. That's why it's called in our policy DIE, an internal auditing department. In most other universities and other organizations, they usually call it a team, whatever you wish to call it. And I understand that the upfront cost is expensive and that we are not funded well by the state. That is unfortunate. That is unfortunate for me when I was a student here and they were making cuts. It was unfortunate for the students today and for the students tomorrow. I understand that. But these are departments that are built to do that. We know from the survey that 79% of the people who came and told us that, put in their info about M&O, 79% of those people are parents or guardians of students in this district. There was a small sample size. There is a bias in favor, based on that survey, of the M&O, and yet over 53% of those same people said the main reason they wouldn't support it is because they think we're going to misuse those funds. I trust Dr. Creekard. I trust Mr. Gadd. I trust our team here. There's no reason that anyone has given me that I shouldn't trust that team. But eventually we will have a new team. And we know that things slipped through the cracks in the past, and rather than hide from it, we need to make it a priority. In addition to all of our educational work that our teachers and our administration work every day so hard to achieve, we need to show as a government financial accountability. That is the end of the day. If you don't remember this, we have a report coming at the end of June. So what? That report can say we're doing things great. That report can say we're doing things badly. But then the question is, okay, so Mr. Gadd changes some things, people change some things, and then we get a whole new set of people, and everything goes out the window again. I'm just asking for priority. Member Perlberg might have said it better, but I do think we need to have a commitment to investigating this and doing it quickly as a priority, because that is what the community most distrusts us for. They know we have great teachers. They know we have great students. But the financial issue is a big one, and it's still there. It's not gone away. So that is what I'd like to say on that point. Thank you.
Board Member Kravitz.
You just said that our constituents don't trust us, so why would they trust someone that's an employee of the district, that's a whole department, when I think we'd be better served by hiring an external auditing group that has more experience?
Board Member Greenberg.
I don't know if we're allowed to discuss the specifics of plans or things. I don't want to get...
To the extent you are talking about this as Dr. Krukard's
Priorities.
Priority.
We are getting a little
Yeah,
sideways.
I don't want to answer. I can answer that question after the meeting, but I don't want to go off the priority bit. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Do you have any, I didn't know if you had any.
Board Member Kravitz.
I just didn't know if Dr. Krukard or Mr. Gadd had any.
Well, I, for one, since these are my quarterly priorities, I have no problem looking at what the various options are for financial and effectiveness auditing to be done in the district, to pursue that avenue, find out who's out there, what kind of services, what kind of costs, and bring that back over the next quarter to you periodically to say, here are some options. I honestly believe that finding one single qualified auditor to come in is that we would be dealing with the same thing as we did with finding a bond project manager in this economy, that we would not be able to pay sufficiently within our pay ranges, unless of course that person was also acting superintendent, maybe to combine the two positions. But so to find one person may be really difficult. So I think we have to be a little more creative in what we're looking for. We also know that there are only, in terms of financial auditing, there are only a couple of firms in the state who do that well. So it'll take some search and thing, but I like the idea of combining both financial and business effectiveness in this search that we're willing, I think we're willing to attempt.
So digesting all this information, is it safe to maybe assume one of the priorities could be you coming up with some solutions or some different choices that maybe checks that box for us from a financial transparency perspective? Maybe kind of a comparison or analysis of what you, and bring it to us, what the best solution for this second set of eyes could be to kind of answer to the public?
I think it is important. We have been talking about this for a year, about continuing to build trust and confidence in what we do on a daily basis, which includes finances, but not solely finances. It's the construction is another issue that we've had, and we've tried to be more transparent, and I do thank you, Board Member Beckham, for constantly keeping us on our toes. That way, to be transparent, we are really trying to do that, trying to be consistent from one thing to the next. And I think tonight was another good step, and we learned some more about how to do that so that you know what you're voting for. So, yes, I think this is something that is needed for the Yes to Children PAC to be able to say, look what the district is doing to try to rebuild throughout the community. Because there are a lot of people out there, I believe, who only remember what they read in the paper 18 months ago. and won't know until they open up their ballot when it comes in the mail and see that we're looking for an M&O, right, and they don't know anything in between. So to give people the information, we have to take some positive action so that there is information that then can go out and people are saying, yes, look, they are doing something to try to be transparent and to make sure that you have a higher level of trust.
Mr. Gadd?
Thank you, Madam President. I think an external auditor, a CPA auditor, who does schools and who is respected in the profession, there's one firm especially dominant in that area. They also have a fairly large consulting department with people who are knowledgeable about school finance and school district operations. That's helpful because they have that background and perspective with others. And I think that the credibility that they offer on a fairly immediate basis for what's happening in the district, and I understand that there's some need for November and some of those things, that's not going to happen probably with an internal person as much as it would happen with someone who does that for a living. So my suggestion would be that the district take a look at one of the more dominant firms and see if they would come in and do an efficiency study, whatever areas we want them to look at, and come up with a report that's endorsed by a certified public accountant, I think is what primarily the district needs to do.
Board Member Perleberg?
Thank you, and thank you for saying that, because I know in the past, or even our past board, had discussions about how do we bring in support for our current staff to truly talk about efficiencies, to truly talk about best practices. Where are we not well trained in our office staff, our district staff, and that we kind of did recognize at the time that it would have to bring in someone externally to really take a hard look at our practices, because that's hard to do internally. And everyone's got, well, here's what I've always done ever since I started, so to avoid those types of things, that was recognized. And so that really resonates with me, is let's talk about our, an efficiency audit or a best practices audit. So I know there's a better word I'm reaching for, but that could be most beneficial and most have the longest reaching impact for our district.
Again, I think it brings immediate credibility, and the people I'm talking about, they're very well versed in school district operations. They've been doing that for a long time.
And true performance audit, that's the word I was looking for.
Yes. And it's not something that would be influenced internally,
Right.
because they're not an employee.
Exactly.
I think really overall, when you look at all the pluses and minuses, that's the way to deal with it on a fairly immediate basis.
Board
Thank
Member
you very
Greenberg.
much for that.
I don't disagree at all with that. My only point is there's a qualitative difference between the two, and I mean that is clear if you watch previous meetings, so I just want to point that out. But whatever we can do immediately and prioritize immediate and long-term planning, that is probably the best way to phrase it, since
So I think getting these priorities nailed down tonight, if at all possible, is important. And so trying to keep track, and I'm open to hearing from my fellow board members if I'm off base here. It seems that this discussion has led us to a couple of areas that may be considered as priorities. I know you brought up the program facility plans for each learning community could potentially be a priority. Marketing updates, which you already had as a priority, especially with the growth schools. And then number 3, some sort of solution to this auditing financial transparency situation. And then the final one just be the updates on the performance goals when we get them. Are we kind of in agreement with what we?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I know. I was going to point to you actually, because I think you mentioned you mentioned Board Member Beckham, the
Solar contracts, which,
Oh,
that's what I had mentioned.
okay.
as
No,
the
I was
priority.
actually going
But
back.
I understand that
add to
is
your
already
update.
a priority, but that's why I thought it was a pretty easy one to put in there.
Okay, solar contracts. I was actually going for the update on the
Thematic goals.
thematic goals. That was. Well, did you already have that on
No,
yours?
I
I'm
thought
sorry.
that was going to be one of the, when we discussed his overall goals and his
Okay.
performance-based. I didn't know where we
Okay.
landed with that.
All right.
But
That's
remember,
all
we're
I
in
was
3
gonna bring
months,
up.
We would potentially be adding or and
Right.
taking off as well.
Could,
The idea was on thematic goals, is that would be a constant. Every
Right.
quarter, we would just get an update.
That's
And
what I
it's
was hearing,
already
too.
being done, according to Dr. Creekard, so it's more or less just formalizing it to all 5 of us.
That's what I was hearing.
okay, so could I ask that the work on the solar contract be something we might put off for the second quarter? I mean, we can start working on it, but not with the other 5 priorities that I have for what I'm listing as July, August, and September. While at the same time getting school opened and.
Well, I had asked about the solar contracts, and from what I understand, you had said that you wouldn't have time into the fall anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm just putting them out there that they
Okay.
are a
Thank
priority.
you.
So I think putting them as being worked on now and that you would be reporting in the second quarter by December
Okay.
would be great.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
so,
do you want me to list what I think are 5
sure.
to check? So, the program facility plans, 1. Marketing updates, especially growth schools, 2. The financial transparency, best practices, audit, whatever, that whole thing is 3. The thematic goal review is 4, and then updates on the performance goals, the evaluation goals, the larger as
Right.
well.
So 4 and 5 would really be,
Similar.
well, we're not setting those performance goals. We've tabled. That one for the contract doesn't happen until August, correct?
I think you meant that last
Yeah, but
year's
to work on it
goals,
this-
he has to give us
Okay,
the
okay.
finished product.
I see what you're saying. Okay. Are we in agreement? Should I make a motion? Okay. I make a motion to approve the superintendent's expectations priority for quarterly meetings pursuant to his 2019-2020 contract. Do you want me to list them again? No. No, per Dr. Creekard's list. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Board Member Perleberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Okay, do I have any requests for future items?
We just made that list.
All right, we move to dates of upcoming meetings. Tuesday, August 6, 2019, 5 p.m. is a study session
The MDA.
at the MDA. Tuesday, August 20th, 2019, 5 p.m. is a regular governing board meeting at Coronado High School. Do I have any governing board reports? Okay. I make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Greenberg seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 6:09 p.m.